Hello everyone, and welcome to part 2. In part 1, we talked of the horror of pre-anesthetic surgery and the 19th century's medical breakthroughs that led to life-saving changes in the surgical field. Fast forward to World War I, and being a medical museum in Bath, we must first touch upon a story that resides in Bath itself. In 1916, Bath was a quiet English city, but that identity was tested, because into this city of calm came the broken bodies of war. Men torn apart by bullets, limbs shattered, and minds fractured by shell shock. And at the heart of it all is a hospital that no longer exists. This is the story of the Bath War Hospital. For centuries, people travelled far and wide to Bath for the healing thermal waters in the hope of curing all types of ailments, especially from chronic illnesses. The medieval era saw those suffering from leprosy come in the hopes of becoming whole again. Others came to soothe arthritic conditions, like gout, especially during the Georgian period, and soldiers came to recover from wounds, aches, and pains. By the late 18th century, that tradition had formalised into institutions, one being the Bath Casualty Hospital, founded in 1788, and the Bath City Dispensary and Infirmary in 1792. These two institutions would later merge to form what would become Bath United Hospital, opening in 1826 in Bow Street, on what is now the site of the Gainsborough Hotel, coincidentally just round the corner from where the museum stands today. Then, in 1864, Queen Victoria granted this hospital royal status, and the Royal United Hospital, or RUH, was born. In 1914, the war begins. Many at the time believed it wouldn't last long, but the ferocity of the fighting only continued. Fast forward to 1916, and the conflict is still raging, and the scale of injury is unlike anything Britain has seen before. Bath responds to the overwhelming amount of casualties and opens a war hospital at Coombe Park, with a capacity of 500 beds which were quickly filled. Suddenly, this peaceful city becomes a hub for treating wounded soldiers. Men are sent from across the country, even from other hospitals, to receive the specialist care given here. Now, it's easy to forget that this was before the formation of the NHS in 1948, so projects like this, amongst others, were a huge undertaking at the time. But what of the conditions of this war hospital? Well, in 1915, aged 27 and newly married, Robert Stanley Morgan enlisted in the army. He was wounded on Thursday the 20th of September 1917 and eventually taken to Bath War Hospital. He comments, saying it was a heaven of clean sheets, good food, and the best of attention. And comparing this with the conditions soldiers would be subject to in the trenches, it's easy to see why it really was heaven. He also comments that my head is healing rapidly, too rapidly, I think, so I'm thinking of swinging the lead somehow. She'll try to get my teeth seen to while I'm here. Obviously, Stanley did not want to go back to Flanders, and who could blame him? Fortunately, he didn't. He was discharged from Bath War Hospital, and his Lewis gun experience was used to train new recruits in camps around the south of England. So, in the grand scheme of things, it was actually a happy ending for Stanley. But there's a problem. Despite its importance, the War Hospital lacks one critical technology: X-rays. The original RUH building in Bow Street had them, but the War Hospital at Coombe Park did not. This critical piece of technology was needed to identify exactly where fragments of shrapnel and bullet may lay. This changed thanks to one man, Cedric Chivers, who eventually opened a bookbinding business based in Bath. He funded a new building called Q-Wing and equipped it with those all-important X-ray machines, elevating Bath War Hospital to the technological level of RUH. Q-Wing didn't just bring technology, however, it brought new kinds of treatment. Therapies here were developed for wasted muscles, twisted limbs, stiffened joints, and perhaps most hauntingly, shell shock. Soldiers who suffered from this typically experienced uncontrollable trembling, panic attacks, the feeling of dread, dizziness, the inability to sleep, walk, or even talk. This was essentially early rehabilitation medicine, not just saving lives, but trying to restore them. But the hospital didn't act alone. Behind the scenes, civilians played a crucial role, just like they did in many other areas of the war effort. Enter the Surgical Requisites Association, an offshoot of Queen Mary's Needlework Guild. Their purpose was to produce surgical materials, such as dressings, splints, and much more. The innovation here is incredible. Two sculptors, Anne Atchison and Eleanor Halley, created splints from papier-mâché. These were lightweight, they were cheap, and they were very effective. And they were made from old sugar bags, collected from grocers and even by Boy Scouts. Nice bit of recycling. In Bath, the association set up a depot at 39 Gay Street, staffed entirely by volunteers. By 1918, they had around 170 people working there. These were mostly women, working tirelessly cutting, stitching, and assembling. The association's president, Mrs. Preston King, gave it a name, the Gift House. Because in her words, everything received there is given, and everything is given away. Among the items they produce were temporary prosthetic limbs. Simple wooden peg legs, as they were called, were given to amputees until they could receive permanent artificial limbs at Roehampton. It was during this period, for the first time, limb manufacturers worked in tandem with surgeons, a cooperation between the art of surgery and the art of limb manufacture and fitting. This cannot be understated. Prosthetics at this time were by no means perfect. In fact, many men would only wear them on special occasions or simply discard them after leaving the hospital. Nevertheless, innovation was slowly occurring, and this collaboration between surgeon and the art of prosthetic design marked a turning point in prosthetic manufacture. It's a stark reminder survival was only the beginning. Aftercare and post-operative treatment was and still is paramount. By November 1918, the Bath Chronicle reported that the association had produced 2,880 items. Most were sent directly to the Bath War Hospital and other local institutions. Today, unfortunately, nothing remains of the original War Hospital building. It was replaced completely when the RUH moved to Combe Park in 1932, but the legacy is still there in the form of the modern RUH. It is also the home of the Royal National Hospital for Rheumatic Diseases, which moved there in 2019, which provides invaluable care to those who suffer with rheumatic conditions, and of course the site's most recent addition, the Dyson Cancer Centre, funded by James Dyson. It also lives on in the memory of the city that transformed itself from a place of leisure into a place of survival and rehabilitation. Bath didn't just treat the wounded, it helped rebuild them. A poignant extract of a tribute written in the Bath Chronicle in 1928, just before the Combe Park site would be reincarnated into the RUH, reads as follows. Those who watched the work of the committees and detachments, the workers, men and women of all ranks and classes, know too that here was being written a record of devoted service, selfless sacrificing effort, not perhaps on the scroll of fame, because so much of it was performed out of general sight, but nevertheless imperishable, written in letters of gold. I wish to extend my gratitude to the writers of the website bathwarhospital.org, one of the few places I could find that told the hospital story with such depth, compassion, and had some incredible images, so thank you. It's interesting that there is an additional theme to this two-part episode, not one of chopping limbs off or simply surviving an operation or the screams or the blood or anything like that, but one of selflessness. Surgeon, technology, and the everyday person working together for the good of the patient. Now, stick around to hear from medical historian Dr. Emily Mayhew. She delves into the wider context, the unsung heroes, and how over 41,000 British men had their lives changed forever, not just from war, but by the never ending pain they endured after amputation surgery.
Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Mayhew, and I am a military medical historian. And this means that my primary area of interest is in military medicine. So it's in wounds and all things that occur to service personnel during war. I have a particular interest in both the point of injury, but in the long term recovery. So I summarize my work as being about survival and life beyond survival. And then well, not I don't know how unexpectedly it is. I don't work in a history department. I work in a science department at Imperial College London. I sit within the bioengineering department because that's where we do most of the work on amputation and prosthetics. And so many of the people that we work with are military veterans. So everything kind of links up. I think it does anyway. It links up in a purposeful way. I get to apply the knowledge that I have of looking at long-term recovery from war injuries and centuries worth of research to wars and casualty that are happening today. So that's me. I'm a historian who always hopes to be useful.
Don't we all?
And thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
So,
And by the way, thank you for finding me. I mean, do you put amputation in the internet and it comes up? Oh, that's Emily.
Yeah, Emily's on the top.
Emily's
you're
on the
literally,
top. Yeah.
yeah, you're the first result, and I thought it's got to be her, hasn't it?
Yeah,
It's got to be.
exactly. It's got to be
Um,
me. Exactly. Exactly.
yeah, no. But you, and in all fairness, you were like one of the top results, so so
Great.
I had to go for you, and
Great.
but yeah, but thank you. So we know that antisepsis or antiseptic medicines were well in use by World War One period. Now, how effective was that on the battlefield? Where are we?
So we're thinking about antisepsis, and when you look back as a historian, you tend to think of that in relation to antibacterial therapies, which of course we don't have any of. But antisepsis is very much accepted by that point, and it's also recognised as necessary. So not only do you have I'm going to talk about stretcher bearers, but when I talk about stretcher bearers, what I really mean is paramedics. We just didn't have the word then. So the people those people that go and pick up the wounded from the battlefield are aware that the wound needs to be kept as clean as possible from the moment they pick it up, because otherwise there are going to be infections in the open trauma that will be very damaging. And then there is a real concern about antisepsis. So that's met during surgery, which is kind of the obvious place, but also throughout the recovery in the field hospitals. And the really important point about antisepsis, and this will continue to be true in antibacterial treatment, is that this is a nursing issue. It's nurses who will deal with this problem. The surgeons will try to keep everything clean during surgery, but it's nurses who will sit hour after hour keeping the wounds clean. It's a lavage based approach. There was always a dispute, mainly between Alexander Fleming and the followers of Carol Dakins, whether this should be just a simple saline solution or a bleached-based solution. But the principle is lavage. Nurses would spend hour on hour irrigating the wound, keeping it irrigated, preventing sepsis and what we would know later to be bacterial infection. The solution is always nursing based, and it takes up all their time. When they're called away, someone else has to come in and keep doing it. Infection is, and it remains, a really significant problem.
And I'm assuming because it's largely trench warfare that was a real issue. Mud, dead bodies, all kinds of contaminants.
Absolutely. So this is there are I spend a lot of time talking about the First World War to people I never expected to be talking about it to. So that's the right sentence, yes. And a lot of it is people who are going to go out and deal with the problems in Ukraine. And the part of the problem is the same issue. The wars are being fought on land that has been farmed for 1,000 years. So if you think about the amount of manure that's been dug in over centuries, because bacteria is really good for farmland. It's just very bad for people who fall on farmland with open trauma. So yes, it's to do with firstly the ground on which the war is fought on. Secondly, the length of time before that person is brought into a medical facility where their wound has been cleaned. And generally, slightly, although the principle of sepsis is understood, the range of bacterial infection is not quite understood at that point. Now we understand all too well, but it's the same problem.
Wow. I never thought of that. The whole the farming aspect with the manure.
When you see farmers in medieval pictures, they're ploughing in manure. They're doing it by
Yeah.
hand. They're not doing it with a machine. But what they're doing is keeping soil live and dynamic and highly bacterialized. Great for crops, not great for people.
Which means this war was not, shall we say, ideal conditions for medicine and for surgery. Um, Nursing was paramount, as you just said, and without that, it would have fallen back into infection. Do you think nursing is just as important now as it was back then, or is it for maybe the same reasons or different reasons?
I think that one of the things that I always found when I was doing this research is that everybody knows the story of, I talk about survival and life beyond survival. Everybody knows the glamour story of saving someone's life, of bringing in the helicopter or carrying someone in, shouting clear. That narrative is something we really understand very well. That moment between life and death, when everything is shifted towards life and the person survives. And then we don't pay much attention to what happens after that. But what happens after that is in fact about two things that don't get nearly enough attention. One is rehab and the other is nursing. It is all about people who are prepared to simply put in the time in with really repetitive jobs that are not glamorous, that very rarely get the attention that they deserve in the cinema. Really, that I think the book that everyone knows is Testament of Youth by Vera Brittain. But much beyond that, we don't pay attention to nurses or to physiotherapists, but that's another story. But it's nurses who, they're by far the majority of medical personnel on the Western Front are nurses. We don't think about that. There's maybe 4 doctors in a field hospital and 20 or 30 nurses. There'll be stretcher bearers and medical porters, but the vast majority of qualified medical personnel on the Western Front in field facilities, in field hospitals, they don't go much more forward than that, are nurses. And they are doing the lion's share of the care and the life saving moment by moment, day by day.
Would you say in your field now or in your field of research that that is now more acknowledged, or would you argue that there's still a way to go?
I would argue that there's still a way to go, and we need a good film, and we need some good television series. And people often ask me, how do we fix this? How do we fix this image? And it's like, well, make a great film that features a nurse. Write a great book that features a nurse. One of the best I've read recently, because it applies in the 1960s to Vietnam, but it can also apply now, or it can apply in the First World War. And so the book is by Kirsten Hanna, and it's called The Women. And it's about nurses in Vietnam. And it's one of the very few books that I've read that really effectively looks at the role of nurses, how they learn. They just learn while they're there. Nobody says, oh, you'll take some extra training courses. And also the psychological cost of working that intensely, which again, we tend not to pay attention to. So I think the answer to your question is, I still don't think we pay enough attention. I still don't think we realize that it's good to have a good surgeon. Good doctor is also important, but what's really important is that you have a great nursing team when you've got a serious wound or you require critical care, but we don't see them. They are much less visible than the glamorous helicopter flying emergency technicians. And I really hope that I will one day look back and say, ah, yes, the balance has finally been restored.
I have your book here. I've been
Excellent.
browsing, and what really captivated me was the stories you tell behind the people. When we said at the beginning we were going to talk about amputations, it's kind of a sensitive topic because automatically we think about pain, you know. And before, I don't know, before 50 years ago, it was about survival. And now, as you mentioned, it involves a lot more. It's not only about survival, but even the change of identity of the person, the people around, the people involved for the caring of the person. And I really have to acknowledge you that you at one point decided to pay your attention to that, to the stories, to the people, instead of just going to the facts of military history of, you know, this happened on this date and blah, blah, blah. And I would like to know what triggered you to start researching on this topic.
Well, I had written a book. It was my PhD. You all know that was about burns patients in the Second World War. There was a cohort of burns patients in the Second World War that needed both their faces, their hands, but more complicatedly, their faces generally needed to be completely repaired. And they invented a completely new form of plastic surgery in order to do that. But in order to get the patients through that long process, maybe 20 or 30 surgeries, while their face was rebuilt over a couple of years, it was nurses who were absolutely key. And the reason that I understood that was because my grandmother was one of those nurses. And everybody knows who the surgeons are, but they don't know the nurses who, when the surgeons leave. So my grandmother, for instance, used to do a very difficult thing that was just, it was a task that was really just given to her. Nobody thought about how it might best be done, but she was given the job of meeting the families and the fiancés of the young men who'd had very bad facial casualties, and to introduce them, to reintroduce them in a really difficult moment. Because in particular, men had got engaged very quickly, as they do in the war. I've never encountered a war where people don't get engaged very quickly. And from someone being engaged to a dashing Spitfire pilot in an RAF uniform to someone acknowledging that that person is now a casualty and the handsome face that they knew has gone forever, that's a really problematic moment. And that was the moment that my grandmother dealt with hundreds of times in her career during the war. And so that's, sorry, it's a long answer, but that was the first point.
No.
I thought, what is it that nurses are doing that no one's paying attention to, but which means that people can keep going in their treatment and in their recovery? So having written up my PhD, and I thought, well, this was the Second World War. What happens in the First World War, where it's a much more, that there are far many more patients, they've got much more complex injuries, and they're in one place at one time, and who are the women that are moving among them, and who are, as I said before, hour by hour, making sure that they can, their treatment can benefit them, but also that they can begin their recovery. And I think the most important thing that I learned about the nurses on the Western Front is that they had all been active in the suffragette movement. And they had set their suffragette advocacy aside to train as nurses and become nurses on the Western Front. Because in both cases, they were serving their country, and they identified both of those very closely. And the more I dug in, then I went to the Imperial War Museum. I did the thing we always do, and I went into the archives and I looked up the papers of nurses, many of which had never been taken out. And then you find these stories, which they've carefully written down. Hopefully somebody's typed up, so you don't have to look at tiny writing. And what I realized was, not only were they there to serve their country, not only were they being left some of the most difficult psychological decisions, but that they become technical experts in things like nursing people with eye injuries, nursing people with stomach injuries, and that expertise is not recognized. And so it was really important for me to tell their stories. And I mean, there would have been, I could have written a whole book on nurses, but I wanted to do the casualty continuum. But I found a lot of nurses who wrote really well and who had a great eye for detail. I didn't need to dig around for learning about that they had fancy dress costumes or that they decorated the wards for Christmas, because they put that in their memoirs. And I pulled it out because I thought that it would make people would say, hopefully, what you just said. This isn't just about military history. This is about human beings in an extraordinary situation, but meeting it with very human strength.
We've done the gory stuff. We've done the antisepsis. Was there anything else that took you by surprise when studying World War One?
So I think it's the opening chapter of Wounded where I talk about stretcher bearers.
Mhm.
And I kind of understood that this was portering, that, they would go in, pick people up and take them in, and then they would receive medical care. But what I had completely failed to understand, and the problem with stretcher bearers is that they don't write letters home, and they don't keep diaries, and they don't really talk about what they do, because not everyone has failed to recognize the value of that care at the point of wounding. It's absolutely essential now. It's why you see paramedics on motorcycles going to car crashes, because we know that the care that you get as close as possible to your point of wounding is the care that's going to determine your survival. So stretcher bearers they are trained. It's recognized within about 3 months that the stretcher bearer corps is not just for carrying people, that they're going to need to be able to give some basic, I'm loath to call it first aid, because it's much more complicated than that. It's point of wounding care. And so they learn how to bandage and again, to be very careful about infection. But mainly what they do is they learn triage. We call it triage today, but they learn to recognize who they should treat and who is not going to make it. So it's the stretcher bearers who recognize who's going to be strong enough to receive treatment and be moved on to the field hospital. And ordinary men make decisions that you should have a lot of training for nowadays. So they learn to look at a casualty and see what their injuries are, and if there is any likelihood of survival. And if there is not, then they will, much like the nurses, they will work to ease that person through and until they die. And then they will make a note of where they died, so later on someone can come and get them. So it's the stretcher bearers for me that was the greatest revelation, because I hadn't, everything else I could slot into a general history, surgery, anesthetics, rehab. But stretcher bearers, we never start with them. And we should always start with the point of wounding. Who is there? Who is ensuring survival? And in the case of the First World War, that's stretcher bearers or paramedics. But they were stretcher bearers then.
They needed 5 people, 4 to carry one person and 1 to watch over the patient. And
absolutely.
And plus the stretcher itself was very heavy. Plus the conditions of the soil and everything they needed to carry, So
all of that. And again, it's something where I do shout at the television when I see two stretcher bearers and a casualty, and it's like, no, they're going to get about 5 yards and then it's going to be too heavy. You're going to need 4 people plus someone, as you say, overlooking the patient, but also finding their way. Nothing makes me guaranteed to throw a cushion at the television screen than 2 stretcher bearers. But it's important, thinking about when wars are represented, and particularly when medical care in war is represented, we have an idea of what we think it is, and that is where we get it from. We get it from the television and we get it from films. So the least they can do is cast more people as stretcher bearers.
Mm-hmm.
Do inaccuracies in these movies, do they need correcting? Does it annoy you? Does it really annoy you?
I think what I do is, before I get annoyed enough to go and write a letter, one of my PhD students the other day said, I think I'm going to write someone a letter because this is wrong. And I said, welcome to being old. When you're old, you want to write a letter.
Yes, yes, I know what you mean.
Yeah, exactly. Find them and write them a letter. So I wait until the movie is finished, and then I think about what is the overall message that they're sending. And if overall that's a message I can go with, I'm very happy with it. So I was working on a film. It had scenes from World War One in it, and they were making a film called Wonder Woman at the same studio, and I wasn't working on that, but someone came in from Wonder Woman and said, "Oh, we're using your book." They waved wounded at me and said, "We're using this for detail." I was very excited, but I mean, although annoyed that I wasn't in there working on Wonder Woman, but I remember seeing the end of Wonder Woman and thinking, the message that they're sending about the First World War is really good. And even though she's a superhuman from a distant island, actually the message about war and how frustrating it is, because at the end of the day there are acres and acres and acres of land with dead people on it, and we really should know better. I was very happy with that. I liked Wonder Woman. I thought it was very good. I thought it sent a very strong message about female role modeling, but I thought that the messaging about medical history in the First World War was very good. There's a scene where Wonder Woman goes to a railway station in London, and she sees the hospital trains being emptied and the platforms and the bridges and the roads being overwhelmed by casualties, and she is herself overwhelmed on our behalf. It's a really good way to see it through her eyes. Even though she's a superhuman or goddess, she sees this scene of broken humans being unloaded from trains, and it overwhelms her. And that was truth for me. So I didn't mind any of the other, and actually I don't know if there are inaccuracies. Probably I have to read comics to know if there are inaccuracies. But the important stuff about the First World War and about the cost that the toll that we paid, that was all right. So that's okay with me. You know, people watch Wonder Woman, and somewhere in their brain is that image of her going to see this bridge full of casualties and just taking on that image. That works fine for me. I can, you know, I might not get that through in a chapter, but Wonder Woman will get it through in 2 minutes, and that's great. That's why I go on about movies, you know, all the time. Make a good movie about nurses.
And so
Maybe we should do that instead of the podcast.
No, podcasts are also great.
I tell you what, Emily, you should write that letter.
I should write that letter, actually. Write that letter.
If you can send a message to the people, to the audience, you know, what would it be about, you know, amputations and how better for us to perceive people who's gone through that situation?
I think it is the pain issue. A lot of people talk about psychological trauma and they talk about PTSD, and all of that's important, but it's not my field. My field is prosthetics and making a life beyond survival with a prosthetic as pain-free as possible. I want everyone to understand that when you are a superhuman and you have one of those, you have a leg that you can, the Paralympics is starting on Wednesday. I have a number of veteran colleagues who are participating, and they do it in spite of pain, not because the absence of pain. That it's a bit like, oh God, just when you think I couldn't get any more miserable. Hans Christian Andersen wrote a story called The Little Mermaid, which is about a mermaid who falls in love with a human, and she sacrifices her voice, and she becomes able to walk on land, but the price is that every step she takes feels like there are knives cutting into her feet. And that's what it is with amputation. There is nothing about amputation that doesn't mean pain every day, from the moment you wake up to the moment that you go to bed. We have not, after a century, as I've said before, but I'm going to I could say it every day, so we have not really offered much of a solution. So it's great that people understand that that prosthetics are cool now, but they're not really. They mean you can walk. They mean you don't have to go if you have a lower limb prosthetic, but they also mean that every step is painful. And I think people don't understand that this is an inherently painful condition. It's an inherently painful way to be a surviving human being. And people will come away from the Paralympics and they'll be full of joy that these incredible people, but they do it in spite of pain. I think that's the single thing I would like people to know.
So instead of being sympathetic, it would be better for us to be compassionate, to understand it and bless their process as well,
Absolutely. And press, I don't know where science is going to go with this, because I work at Imperial, so I should, if they were really going to fix this, I would know. And we still don't have much to offer this patient cohort. That's what we really need to do, is to resolve the issues of pain. I was asked once at the Science Museum how I would deal with the problem of pain with people who had lower limb prosthetics. And I said, we need to go to another planet and find a symbiotic life form that we can attach to the residual limb that will then form a moderator for the pain and the prosthetic limb. And I said, and the chances of us doing that are more likely than us finding a scientific resolution for pain. And we haven't been to another planet yet, and we have not found that symbiotic life form. But I said it as a joke, but I really meant it as, this is the most difficult thing to resolve. It's the most difficult thing to live with. And we don't know the answer to all those questions.
Yeah, and I guess, with the pain, I can relate to Bath Medical Museum, because we started in Bath, the waters,
Oh,
the
yes.
thermal waters,
Absolutely.
and all the healing and the study and research on arthritis and rheumatic conditions. I myself, I do live with pain 24/7 because of the rheumatic condition I have. So I do understand that living in pain is not easy, even though I'm very much into meditation. I know what to do. I sometimes take meds and all that stuff. But it gets to a point that, it snaps. It's like, I don't want to know about anything, because it's draining. It's emotional and physically draining, and mentally as well at some point. And I'm sure many people who are listening will relate to that as well. Living in pain is not an easy journey to live in, but there's a lot of
I admire
lessons
all
behind.
humans that say, I have pain all the time, but I do it anyway. I do it in spite of the pain. I do it anyway. I don't give in. I do it anyway. That's what the cohort that I know, they live with pain. They have accepted that this is the way their lives are going to be, and they do it anyway. And you understand that. You do it anyway. So one of the cool things about being human, I think.
Yes,
You do it anyway.
Yes, keep on going, be compassionate,
Keep on
and
keeping
keep
on.
going.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's how he won the war, isn't it?
I don't know. There's an issue with the German supply lines. But you know what? There's usually an issue with German supply lines. But people say to me, I actually, it comes back to your question about, do you get upset if there's inaccuracies? We all know who those people are that go, well, I think you'll find.
Yeah.
So I get people that come up and say, oh, well, let's talk about the end of the war. And it's like, I don't sure, you do that. There's military people over there. Go away. I just do medical here.
Brilliant.
So, and it's keep on keeping on. I think that's what it is. I'm always astonished.
Going back to the prosthesis side of things, just very briefly, prosthetics has been around for a long time by the point of World War One. Was the development of prosthetics improved by the sheer amount of amputees that were coming in during that period?
So not the design of prosthetics doesn't change very much. The really big design moment is in the American Civil War, where one of the casualties in the American Civil War fits a knee joint, so that the prosthetic, rather than being a stiff one single sort of peg leg, it can bend at the knee. And it means, and I remember there's a great story, which I think I have it in Wounded. I might have it in the Afghan book, but where his family just hear him walking around upstairs on his peg leg, and then they hear him coming down the stairs, and they're thinking, wow, how has he done that? And he was an engineer, and he designed a knee joint. So that's a really important moment in the lower limb, in development of lower limb prosthesis. And also then that's adapted for upper limb prosthesis, for elbows and for wrists. But there isn't very much about the prosthetic design that has changed. Whether it's upper limb or lower limb, a prosthetic is two pieces. It's a socket that fits on the residual limb, and then that has a clip at the end, and then you clip on the prosthetic, which is the bit we know, which is the bit with the with the Wonder Woman sign on it, or it's the bit with the running blade on it, and that's the bit that we think is a prosthetic, but the socket is the part that doesn't work. The socket is the part that's been the same forever, and we just don't have a solution. And so I know this is a World War One focused podcast, but I will tell you that most of what I do now is about child blast injury. So for all the problems that we have with prosthetics for adults, for our adult veterans cohort, it is 1,000% worse for children because they're growing. So they need a new prosthetic every 3 to 6 months. So all the problems that we've identified in adults is significantly worse in children. But we did really nail it down. I think probably what I should say is in the First World War, we really nailed it down. We refined the prosthetic design, not very much, but we also came to understand that this is going to be about rehab, lots and lots of lifelong rehab. It's going to be about pain. Same thing about pain. We started to give pensions for amputees and people that suffered pain. That was recognised as a condition, as it wasn't a visible wound. So we really refined our knowledge, and we got a knowledge base from the First World War. So even though we didn't get a new magic prosthetic, prosthetics became a thing. And we've been able to build on that. This is 41,000 people. It's a lot of patients, many of whom lived quite long lives, and we were able to learn how they went on in their lives, and that's knowledge that informs what we do today. It's just we haven't come on very far, and that's the disappointing part.
Wow.
You can get cheerier people on than me.
I just
You've been wonderful.
I'm just letting it all sink in. I think you've revealed another avenue to this subject. I think that, as we said at the beginning, I think people think of blood and injury and gore and pain and stuff, but actually there's a whole other part of human compassion and aftercare that's just as relevant today as it ever was, even back then. And I think that's a very good message. I think that's
I'm very glad you've taken that message. The First World War, I say to a lot of people, when you've got a question about this, look for the answer in the First World War, because the chances are it's there. So when I talk to people who are in Ukraine, the chances are that this is a question that's been addressed in the First World War, and we have the answer. It's just that they don't think that it's current, except that it is. And everything that you've just said is absolutely right. This is about the hinterland of injury. This is about all the things that need to go on in life beyond survival, and they're complicated, technically skilled, immensely compassionate. And we did them all before, a century ago, and we're really good at it. We got really good at it. Isn't that hopeful? Isn't that cheery?
Yes. And we're going to improve it.
We're going to improve it.
Yes.
You heard it here first, folks. Listen to the Queen. Go back to World War One. Find all the answers there, no matter what it is. If you're struggling for something to eat, decide it. Go back to World War One.
World War One. Absolutely. Go to the Bath Museum and ask the historians. If you want to know the time, ask a historian.
Oh, Emily, this has been fantastic. Honestly, we won't take up any more of your time, but I think this conversation has been more than what I ever thought it would be, and we thank you for your time, honestly.
Yes,
thank you all.
Yes,
thank you very much.
It's been great.
Wonderful question.
Wonderful to meet you.
Oh, thank you. And we will have you back on. I don't know.
Anytime.
Yeah.
We will find a topic.
We'll find a topic. And we'll have you back on.
Any war. I'm not very good at peace. Just do war.
We'll do wars.
Do wars. I can do wars. Yeah.
And please, but on one condition though. You have to bring Grogu.
Yes,
Yeah.
I don't know. He makes a Grogu sign.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'll bring
just
him.
we're
He's
gonna.
always here.
I think we're gonna upload this as upload this entire video in its entirety.
yes,
I think
Yes, yes.
people need to see the real Emily
Yes.
Mayhew.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I occasionally, if you're doing a very, if you're doing like a meeting, I occasionally put Grogu up to see if anybody's actually watching. And you've scored
Just like-
100% gold
just
stars.
like-
Oh, look!
And I got a positive penguin from a kid at school that I work for. A
Positive penguin.
a positive penguin.
All
That's
right.
fantastic.
I don't have any here.
It doesn't
I have one
rival
of
Grogu,
them, but it's a potato.
oh, have
I have a
you?
matching
Oh,
one.
it's a
Yes,
positive potato.
it's a positive potato. It's in my corridor.
There's a reason we love University Challenge, and it's not the questions, it's the mascots. I think you should say to everyone who comes on in future, could you please come with a mascot?
Mascot, yes.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yes, I think we all should bring our mascot
Mhm.
next time.
Yeah,
Yes.
We should,
exactly.
yes.
Emily, you've been amazing. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Emily.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Emily.
much.
Thank you.
And thank you so much.
Have a good evening. I'm going to
Thank
check
you,
football score.
Emily.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.
Bye.
Thank you for watching, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this. It was a massive thing to do a two-parter, but we felt like we needed to, given the amount of information and incredible stories that we had. Visit the website for more information on exhibitions and what's going on with the museum. The exhibition for this episode will be April the 11th to April 18th, 12 till 4 p.m. each day. Hope to see you there.
Exactly.
Nothing but positivity, guys. Bring the love, send the vibes, positive vibes.
Sorry, I'm just sending a message then.
It's very unprofessional.